So our next presenter for this morning is Dr. Margaret M. Calderon. She finished her Bachelor of Science, Master of Science, and Doctor of Philosophy in Forestry from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. She is a professional forester, a professor of forest resources management, and was appointed UP Scientist 1 under the University of the Philippines Scientific Productivity System. She teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in forestry economics and forest resources management, and undertakes research in the fields of forestry, forestry economics, natural resource valuation and pricing, and payments for ecosystems and services. Dr. Calderon is a member of the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, Project Appraisal Panel from 2018 to 2020, and a director of the Asia Pacific Network for Sustainable Forest Management and Rehabilitation from March 2020 to 2023. She led 3 projects pertaining to the development of a sustainable financing mechanism for the Ifugao rice terraces from 2007 to 2010, 2 of which were funded by the Economy and Environment Program for Southeast Asia, and the third from which this paper presentation is drawn by the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, or SHARCA. So her presentation for this morning is on the community-based resource assessment and management planning for the rice terraces of Hongduan, Ifugao, Philippines. Madam?
Thank you very much, Mr. Judy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my co-authors, Nathaniel Bantayan, Josefina Dizon, Isa Jose Sahise, Annalyn Codilan, and Myronel Salvador, I would like to thank the Ifugao State University Research and Development Center for the Ifugao Rice Terraces for inviting us to present our paper in this summit. The title of our presentation is Community-Based Resource Assessment and Management Planning for the Rice Terraces of Hongduan, Ifugao, Philippines. And this paper is derived from a project we completed in 2010 with funding support from the Southeast Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, or CIRCA. As we haven't been back to Ifugao in the last 12 years, this paper presentation may very well be considered a revisit to what we did before, and we hope that our findings remain relevant and useful. As we know, the rice terraces in the municipalities of Kiangan, Hongduan, and Mayuyao, and 2 barangays in Banawe were inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage List under the category of organically evolved landscapes. However, the condition of the terraces deteriorated over the years due to low rice productivity, outmigration, overcutting of woodlots, erosion and landslides, the problematic irrigation system, and the presence of pests such as golden snails and giant earthworms. As a result, the terraces were transferred to the World Heritage Endangered List in 2001, but the Philippine government undertook interventions and succeeded in having the terraces removed from the World Heritage Endangered List in 2012 and transferred back to the World Heritage List. The presentation describes the results of a study that aimed to build the capacity of the farmers of Hongduan, Ifugao in community-based resource and damage assessment and management plan preparation. At this point, please allow me to put the study in the context of ecosystem services and payments for ecosystem services. Various ecosystems perform functions and in the process provide different ecosystem services. Ecosystem services refer to the beneficial outcomes for the natural environment or for people that result from ecosystem functions. And examples include support for the food chain, harvesting of animals or plants, clean water, or scenic views. For an ecosystem to provide services to humans, some interaction with, or at least some appreciation by, humans is required. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment classified ecosystem services into 4. We have provisioning services, which include products obtained from ecosystems, the regulating services, which include benefits obtained from the regulation of ecosystem processes, cultural services, which include non-material benefits that people obtain from ecosystems through spiritual enrichment, cognitive development, reflection, recreation, and aesthetic experiences, and supporting services which are necessary for the production of all other ecosystem services. So we can think of the ecosystem services that we enjoy from the Ifugao rice terraces, which fall under these categories. Next, let's bring in the concept of payments for ecosystem services, or what is popularly known as PES. One of the early definitions of PES is that by Wander, who defined PES as a well-defined environmental or ecosystem service, and it is bought but by at least one ES buyer from a minimum of one ES provider, if and only if the provider continues to supply that service or the conditionality criterion. It's becoming more and more recognized that ecosystem services can no longer be provided by nature alone, given the activities of people that affect the production of these ecosystem services. And the sustainability of producing these services has become threatened, and we are finding ways by which this trend can be reversed, and such is the case of the Ifugao rice terraces. We need mechanisms for the conservation of the rice terraces, and one of these is PES. The Ifugao farmers are actually providers of ecosystem services, which are enjoyed by beneficiaries or users such as visitors, hydroelectric power users, or users of water, domestic water districts. Now, why do we need PES? PES is considered a cost-effective means to improve environmental management and improve livelihoods by rewarding people for their efforts in providing ecosystem services such as watershed protection or soil stabilization or preserving cultural heritage. The figure here shows the flow of ES and funds under PES. We have providers that produce or help produce the ecosystem services, and usually the production of these services adversely affects the way they use the land and other resources. For example, as mentioned earlier, some farmers are opting to convert the rice terraces to vegetable gardens because that would bring them higher income especially in the short term. No, but we know that that is not being encouraged. Neither is the cutting or girdling of trees to give way to coffee plantations is being encouraged. No? Now, this in turn may reduce the income that they'll generate from the land in the short term. On the other hand, we have beneficiaries that enjoy the ecosystem services which have value to them or to us. In most cases, the ES are inputs in their production activities, for example, sustainable water supply required by hydroelectric power plants or water districts, or they give satisfaction to tourists who marvel at the beauty of a landscape such as the Ifugao rice terraces. It is therefore in the interest of the beneficiaries to invest in the production of ecosystem services, and this can be done through a payment for ES provision. Farming the rice terraces is no easy task, and their deterioration over time has made farming even more difficult. The Ifugao farmers need financial support to rehabilitate irrigation system and terrace walls and develop livelihood activities to augment low incomes of farmers. On the other hand, there is a strong demand for cultural and other ecosystem services from tourists and other sectors. Because of this, we saw the need to link the farmers' need for support and the tourists and other sectors' willingness to support them. In the context of PES, the study provides information about what Ifugao farmers need to do to secure the provision of cultural and other ecosystem services and how much these may cost. The study area is Hungduan, Ifugao, particularly the barangays of Hapao, Baang, Nunggulunan, and Poblacion. And we used sub-watersheds as the unit of the study and identified 4 sub-watersheds that served as our clusters. Cluster 1 covered parts of Nungulunan and Hapao. Cluster 2, parts of Baang and Nungulunan. Cluster 3, parts of Baang and Hapao. And Cluster 4, parts of Hapao and Poblacion. The use of the watershed approach, or in this case, the sub-watershed approach, departed from the usual practice of using political units such as barangays in management planning. For the capacitation building of different farmer groups, we conducted 3 training workshops. The first was on resource and damage assessment methods. The second was on community mapping. And the third was on management plan preparation. For training workshop 1, we used GIS-based maps where the farmers located their communal forests, trails, and terraces and indicated which terraces were damaged. We also used satellite-based navigation and positioning system, survey instruments, and grid-based assessment in generating data. And these were used in community-based resource assessment that was undertaken by the farmers themselves. The slide here shows the farmers in action during the assessment with our research assistant, who is also present in the Zoom room. And for the 3-dimensional or 3D mapping, we use data generated from the resource assessment. In this activity, the farmers used local knowledge in locating barangays and sitios, woodlots, the terraces, woodlots, and other landmarks on the 3D maps, and indicated the conditions of the terraces. Data from the 3D models were then transformed into GIS maps, which were used to provide estimates of coverage in terms of location and extent. The second workshop was conducted to validate the outputs of the farmer groups and prepare the management plan, while the third workshop was conducted to enhance the management plans prepared by the farmers and present these to local government officials. The tables here show the results of the community-based resource and damage assessment and mapping. So please take note that we did a project from 2009 to 2010, and there may have been changes. But we hope that the pandemic helped increase the undamaged terraces and woodlots or forests. We can see that the proportion of undamaged terraces in Hongduan were generally much higher than those that were abandoned. No? So like 97% for cluster 1 was found to be undamaged, 86% for cluster 2, 85% for cluster 3, and 80% for cluster 4. In terms of land use, forested areas were found to be highest in cluster 4, which also happens to have the highest total area of 2,237 hectares, followed by cluster 2, okay, with 1,273 hectares of forest, no? And so that's the second highest. Area-wise, the rice terraces in cluster 3 were the highest at 1,171 hectares, and about the same areas were found of about 600 hectares in the 3 other clusters. Okay. We have here the outputs of the communities who crossed their barangay boundaries and worked with each other at the sub-watershed level. These are the maps of clusters 1 and 3. And these are the maps of clusters 2 and 4. The green areas are the rice terraces, while the yellow areas are the forests. We can also see the distribution of abandoned and damaged rice terraces, as well as residential areas, particularly in cluster 4. To support the community-based planning that the community did, they developed the problem tree of the rice terraces in Hongduan. The main problem was identified to be the increasing number of rice terraces that were being abandoned and damaged. And this was caused mainly by the lack of water supply, the collapse of terrace walls, the out-migration, and the younger generation's lack of interest to work in the terraces. And these were also mentioned by the first presenter. No? According to the community, this resulted in the loss of their culture and heritage, low rice productivity and low income, and the negative impact on tourism. At the center of the community's solution or objective 3 was the need to restore and rehabilitate the abandoned and damaged rice terraces. This would require the formulation of an ordinance for forest protection, repair of irrigation canals to improve the availability of water supply, the implementation of pest control measures, and the repair of collapsed terrace walls, and efforts to decrease migration and the conduct of IEC campaigns, especially for the youth. In turn, these moves were seen to help preserve the Ifugao culture and heritage, improve rice productivity, and increase farmers' income, and improve tourism value. The farmers' outputs from management planning became inputs in their draft management plans. After the plans were reviewed, they were then returned to the farmers for revision. The plans developed by the farmers were similar in terms of objectives and strategies, but differed in implementation strategies, costs, and scheduling. The farmers were then asked to put their management plans on the map, such as the location of reforestation areas, the terraces to be restored and rehabilitated, and irrigation systems to be established. It was observed that the farmers were not used to planning using watershed as the planning unit since they were more familiar with developing plans using administrative boundaries. In the initial part of the planning process, farmers belonging to different barangays were grouped in one cluster, but they insisted that they should work based on their barangay boundaries. However, it was clarified that mapping and management planning would be done using the watershed approach, where instead of political boundaries, the natural boundaries such as rivers and mountain ridges would be used. Eventually, the farmers understood the approach and worked as one cluster. In the visual maps, farmers identify the specific location of woodlots to be reforested, the abandoned and damaged terraces to be restored and repaired, as well as damaged irrigation canals to be rehabilitated. In addition, they also identified on the visual maps the terrace areas that experience varying levels of pest infestation and soil erosion. So most terrace areas were identified to have moderate to high infestation of pests, such as snails and earthworms. On the other hand, the areas that were most prone to soil erosion usually occurred near river banks and creek bottoms. Now, this is the output of cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, and cluster 4. Okay. And here are some insights from the study. First, the plans developed by the farmers were similar in terms of objectives and strategies, but differed in implementation strategies, costs, and scheduling. Farmers were not used to planning using the watershed as the planning unit since most were more familiar with using administrative boundaries. Strategic behavior in placing cost estimates on activities in the context of submitting management plans to compete for funding source was observed. Some farmers priced labor services much higher than other clusters. Some farmers would not agree to labor sharing and counterpart funding. However, farmers became more open when they were informed that management plans would be more attractive to funding agencies if they would also include elements of labor sharing and counterpart funding in their proposals. In conclusion, the study found that complementing indigenous knowledge with classroom and research techniques proved to be effective in generating reliable information important in planning. The farmers' familiarity with their areas was evident during the mapping activity and was a cost-effective and reliable way of ground truthing. The preparation of management plans was facilitated by the use of 3D maps, which enabled the farmers to visualize the extent and location of problem areas. And it also allowed them to come up with realistic estimates of damaged areas, which they used in management plan preparation. The farmers knew how to address their problems in the terraces, particularly the damaged and abandoned terraces, the water supply, and the pests. However, the harvests from the terraces were barely enough for their subsistence, and they have no surplus income that could be used for terrace repair. Some farmers did not readily accept the use of a watershed as a management unit, and the farmers encountered problems in preparing their financial plans, as shown by the wide variability of cost estimates for different management activities. Based on the results of the study, we see the need to support or subsidize the farmers in managing and conserving the rice terraces. In the short term, the subsidy can come from local government units and other government agencies. But in the long term, the farmers' activities may be supported through a sustainable financing mechanism such as PES. Aside from tourism revenues, such a financing mechanism may also be supported with payments for other ecosystem services produced, such as water generation and conservation, biodiversity conservation, and carbon sequestration. We also saw the need for government to promote a better appreciation for the watershed as a management unit, not only among planners, but also at the community level. And resource managers can consider the use of participatory resource assessment and mapping and community-generated 3D models in planning. Finally, we saw that the potential to submit the management plans prepared by the farmer groups to funding institutions. So we thank the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, or CIRCA, the seed fund for research and training program, and the local government and the people of Hongduan, Ifugao, who were very kind to let us do the study in Hongduan. We have this publication which can be downloaded from the CIRCA website. And on behalf of my co-authors, we thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Calderon. I am from Hongduan, and I really appreciate this study.